Hey y'all, I'm Hope, and today I'm doing my December wrap-up, and I'm really excited for December's wrap-up because I read way more in December than I usually do. I actually ended up reading 11 books, novellas, graphic novels, manga, and a short story. So that was way more than I usually read. I read significantly more pages than I usually read, even though everything I read was mostly pretty short. So I'm really excited about it. I think I did really well for December, and I think it really helped that I was participating in the Reindeer Readathon. I found that last year that gave me a lot of motivation and I read a lot, so I did it again this year. And again, it was a lot of fun and it gave me a lot of motivation and I read a lot. So I didn't end up completing all 9 of the prompts for that, but I did finish 8 of them, so I was really happy with that. So I'm just gonna dive into the books, and I have my marble jar here. Apologies if that is loud. I am trying my best to keep it quiet. But I have my marble jar where I can put marbles for all of the books that I read that I previously owned. So the bulk of my reading this month was the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. I read all 6 of these books for my Goodreads choice, reading all those Sci-Fi Fantasy 2021 nominees project. And I'm gonna link in the description below my video where I actually talk about each of these kind of in depth as I finished them. Not really that in depth, but I talked about each of these books as I finished them, so I'm not going to talk about them at length here, but I thought that this series was really fun. It's basically a set of like little space adventures that are kind of connected. There's an overarching plot, but each book is its own smaller adventure, and I thought that that was a really fun format. It was very episodic. It feels like watching a TV show, which I think is really apt because the protagonist, Murderbot, is a construct that loves to watch TV. So I think that the format is really fun. Each of the books was really fast to read. This is the longest one, Network Effect. It's the 5th book, and it still only took me like a couple of days to read. So again, they're just really fun. And I also thought there were a lot of really interesting big ideas in here around like identity and personhood and what a world looks like where there are like contracts and bots and augmented humans, and like how those different groups are treated differently in a legal sense and in a social sense across different places within the universe. Like there's the Corporation Rim, there's a Preservation Alliance. So there were some big ideas in here, but they were embedded in a really fun story. My battery is flashing at me, so I better swap that out real quick. But when I read these, I only owned All Systems Red, and I then later picked up these, which I know I'm on a buying limit, but I was fine with this because I've already read them, and I really just got them so I could spend some time having them later. Yeah, so I'm just gonna give myself 1 marble for having read All Systems Red at the time that I actually read these. And now I'm gonna go change my battery, hang on. Okay, and we're back. I got my battery all changed out, other one's charging, and this room is very quickly getting very warm with the ring light on, so I'm gonna try and get through this as kind of short and sweet as I can. So the next thing I read was Moriarty the Patriot Volume 1 by Ryosuke Takeuchi and Hikaru Miyoshi. This is a manga that follows James Moriarty from the Sherlock Holmes stories, and it acts as a kind of a suggested origin story for him. And the idea is that, you know, he ultimately became a criminal mastermind, but what if that started with good intentions, if his goal was originally to kind of make sure that wealthy people who were mistreating the people who relied on them and the people that lived on their land, if he was originally trying to make sure that they kind of got their just desserts for their bad behavior. So I thought that was a really interesting premise, and I really enjoyed this one. I am hoping to pick up more volumes in this series, but it's a very strange story because it is very murdery, very, very early on, but it's basically following Moriarty as he becomes the person that he is. It starts with his childhood and talks about like why he wants to do this and kind of what his motivations are, and then moves into like stories of times that he has done this, where he has tackled some bigger, wealthier fish in the pond and gotten kind of revenge on them for their mistreatment of other people. And it starts out kind of like normal-ish, where they're like, okay, I see what's happening here, like I understand the kind of reasons that these people are being targeted by him. And then like the last entry in this particular volume, the last section and story, gets a little bit unhinged, and suddenly there's like additional characters, and the villain is, rather than just being your kind of standard asshole wealthy guy, is got this whole like nefarious plot to prevent people from like sullying their status. It was very strange, but like in a really fun way. So I am really looking forward to reading more from this series, and I did own this one already at the time that I read it, so I get a marble as well. And then I read Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. I actually read this one as an audiobook, but I have the hardcover, and this one was really interesting as well. I liked this. I'm finding that I sometimes struggle to recall things from audiobooks depending on how quickly I listen to it and like who the narrator is. This is one where like I don't remember all of the stories, but there are long sections of this book I do actually remember. So I think that this one was really well done. The audiobook is read by Neil Gaiman himself, and I think he does a great job. So it's just kind of modernizing the language of the myths and telling his version of them based on having read. I think he did both the poetic and prose Edda and pulled from some other sources as well. So this was really interesting. I really love mythology. I think it's fascinating, and Norse mythology is probably the mythology that I have the least knowledge about prior to reading this. So I really enjoyed listening to all of these stories and learning a lot more about like the different gods and goddesses and how they're connected, and kind of how these were like various origin stories for things in the world. So I thought this was a lot of fun. I think I gave it 4 stars. It was really good, and I really enjoyed the audiobook. And I also previously owned this one before I read it, so another marble in the jar. And this was one of the ones that Jacob picked for me to read in December. I think this might be the only one I actually finished, although I did start a few of them. So I'm glad that I at least finished one of them, and I'm currently reading The Alienist, which is one of his other picks, and I've carried that one over to January. And then up next, I'm just going to talk about both of these together. I read 2 graphic novels. I read Lock and Key Volume 1 and Low Volume 1. And of these 2, I liked Lock and Key a lot better. I think that the art in Low worked a little better for me, but the story in Lock and Key worked a lot better for me. So Lock and Key is a Lovecraftian horror story about these kids whose father dies, and they and their mother go to live with their uncle at, what is the name of it? I don't know. They go to this weird named house, and it's in Lovecraft, Massachusetts, I think. And weird things start happening, and there's this house with all these weird keys and doors that can be opened and do different things. And so it's following them, like exploring the house, and also dealing with the fallout of their father's death. And there's also like a villain who is trying to escape from a place that is locked. So there's kind of a lot of stuff going on in Lock and Key. I found that the artwork was at times a little hard for me to tell who was who, at least at the beginning. I got better at it as the story went on, but I really enjoyed what was happening in this one, and I do struggle to kind of maintain interest in graphic novels, but I do think that Lock and Key is one that I would like to continue reading. And then Low is a post-apocalyptic future where people are living under the ocean to avoid the sun's radiation, and they're kind of running out of air. This one is set specifically in a city that I have forgotten the name of, but it's one of several like underwater cities, and they're quickly running out of air, and they're all basically gonna die if they don't fix this problem. And humanity has kind of fallen into, I guess, kind of a form of nihilism. They're all just like, well, fuck it, we're all gonna die anyway, we may as well just like just do whatever the hell we want and, you know, enjoy the little bit of time we have left. And it follows a character who is basically bound and determined to find a way to help humanity just survive. She refuses to accept that this is the end for humanity, and so she and her family are trying to convince the others that it's worth continuing to look, that she has found something that is a potential planet for them to go to. So it follows kind of that story. And I think the reason this didn't really work for me is that there's a lot of this book that just feels like it came directly out of a self-help book, particularly the protagonist. I'm not remembering anybody's names out of this, which I feel like is a bad sign. It's not terribly memorable for me, but the woman who's the kind of the main character here, she says a lot of stuff that feels very much like it's directly out of a positive thinking self-help book. And I think that makes sense because there's also an author's note in here where the writer, Rick Remender, talks about how around the time he was writing this, he was also working with his therapist to become a more positive thinker. So these were kind of ideas that were in his head at the time anyway. So like it makes sense, but I think that it's not done in a way that really works here, because so much of it just feels like she's, it started to feel a little like toxic positivity in the way that she is interacting with the other characters, because so many of them had given up hope. And it's like, yes, that's a bad thing. Like they've totally given up, and so they do have this chance to maybe potentially survive and save humanity, but they've all just given up entirely. But the way she kept like pushing her ideals on other characters throughout the story, it started to feel like toxic positivity here, where she was like, well, you know, you guys think it's bad, but it's only bad because you think it's bad. And it's, you know, if you just started thinking more positively and having optimism, everything would be fine. And I really didn't like the way that kind of came off throughout the story. There's a character who attempts suicide, and then immediately after that, he's elsewhere and he's alive, but like the fact that he was completely just ready to give up, and the fact that he tried to commit suicide in front of this other character is never again addressed. And his mental health is not really like focused on at all, and he's not given any kind of help. It's just like, oh, well, he tried to commit suicide and now he's seeing the beauty of the outside world and therefore he is healed, and it was just, it didn't sit well with me. With all of that said, I did really like the turn that the story took at the very end. I think that the ending of this is the strongest part of it, particularly with one of the daughter characters. It's like a family. It's a guy and his wife, and they have 2 daughters and a son. One of the daughters has a really interesting arc in the last little chunk of the book, and I did like that. But on the whole, I just didn't really enjoy this one. And I don't think I'm going to continue reading in the series. So I know that was a lot of complaining there, but ultimately it was kind of sad because it was the last thing I read in December, the last thing I read in 2021, but it just really didn't work for me. But I could definitely see how this would work for other people because the artwork is beautiful, and it is an interesting look at like a possible future for humanity if we don't take better care of our planet. But, oh, also I read both of those after previously owning them, so I get 2 marbles for that. And that is all of the books that I read in December, and I'm really happy about it. I think I read a lot, and I read some really good stuff. Low was kind of the one exception to that. Everything else I really enjoyed. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you'll consider giving it a like and maybe even subscribing. I'm currently posting new videos every Saturday, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.